Hello and welcome to Movers, Shakers, Designers, Makers. I'm Steve Carpenter, Dean of the College of Arts and Architecture. Now, listen, if you've been following the video interview series, you'll notice that today's talk is a little bit different. Typically, I begin by introducing my guests and sharing a few of their professional accomplishments. Much of the work of today's guest, a two-time alumna of Penn State, is the work of the Guerrilla Girls Collective, of which she is a founding member using the pseudonym Frida Kahlo. Working tirelessly for the past 35 years, the Guerrilla Girls have fought discrimination and have supported human rights for all people. Best known for their outrageous and witty statements like, "Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum?" It is through bold graphics, humor, and statistics that the Guerrilla Girls catch our attention and open critical conversations about discriminatory practices within the art world and within society at large. This is a thrill for me, Frida, to talk to you. So welcome to this episode of Movers, Shakers, Designers, and Makers.
And it's wonderful to be here and to think about my years at Penn State.
Great, great. Looking forward to this conversation. There is so much I would like to talk with you about. We could have hours of my questions. I'm not sure how long the answers would be.
Why not?
Okay, we'll see how this goes. But you already acknowledged your time here at Penn State as a student in the late '60s and early '70s, I believe, a time that was turbulent in their own right. I'd like to hear your sense of that experience. What was it like to be a student when you were here at Penn State?
Well, I went to Penn State in the fall of 1966, and I graduated undergraduate in the spring of 1969. Very, important years. And then I came back to graduate school and graduated in 1971 in the School of the Arts. I was a working class kid from Pittsburgh. My father had died when I was young. I didn't have any money. I actually went to Penn State on my father's dead GI Bill benefit. And it was a time when Penn State was really a working class school. And all of the kids there were from very similar backgrounds. And they were all getting drafted. And many of them, like myself, first generation college educated, we had a lot of family pressure to succeed. And I think that there was a lot of confusion on campus about the draft, about opposing the Vietnam War, about all the injustices in the world. And I think it really made us think and take consequential actions. And I think it really set the tone of my life. I was not early radicalized. I think I was radicalized gradually, but it certainly started with my experience at Penn State.
So the '60s, the time in which you mentioned initially as an undergraduate, and then later the '70s, that time frame, I wasn't. I was in school, elementary school, not in undergraduate school. But I recall things like I remember watching the splashdown, right? The astronauts splashing down. I watched that on television. I remember in the evenings watching the evening news and seeing the names of those soldiers who had died in the war scroll on the television screen. I'm thinking about that cultural space. You mentioned the Penn State context and the working class background context. How did those elements, the larger social and historical elements, factor in at that time for you?
Well, I was really an observer. I wasn't subject to the draft, but I'd had friends who were. And I remember the first lottery, and it was held on television, and everyone was in the hub watching the TV screen as they were pulling up draft numbers, birthdays. And it was so surreal. It was like some Shirley Jackson short story where they were pulling birthdays And then the students whose birthdays were being pulled, it was clear that they were going to be drafted and go to Vietnam. And there was just a tense situation. And the next day there was just a pallor over campus because some had been chosen and others escaped, and could go on with their lives. It was an awesome time. And because State College is kind of self-contained, and there wasn't much then besides school. School was everything. There was no way to escape it. And I think we all were profoundly affected by that. I went on a study abroad program, which ironically was cheaper to go to Europe, live in Europe as a student in 1968 than it was to go to Penn State. So there was an economic factor. I remember borrowing $500 and it lasted me the whole time I was there.
Oh my goodness.
But of course, in 1968 in Europe, there was great upheaval, especially in France, and within a month of getting there, the university closed, our professors were on strike, and I watched, Europe. I watched turmoil in Europe and also how collective action and strikes were able to bring reform. And they brought reform in lots of different ways. So I was a little detached from what was happening in the United States in the spring of '68. And of course, that was when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and then later Bobby Kennedy. So I watched all that from afar. And it was really the first time I had ever lived in a city and had a kind of urban sense. And it was a very exciting, confusing time. And I also remember that summer sitting in a train traveling across Europe. I traveled with a bicycle and listening to what was happening in Chicago during the Democratic Convention. And then all of the events that led to the trial of the Chicago 7. So all of that was milling in my head. And I was young. I didn't have a lot of experience. I didn't come from a particularly political family. So it was all milling in my head. And it was really years later that it all started to make sense. But that was very crucial and it was very elemental and kind of, it set the stage.
Sure. I'm picking up on some elements of what you just described that might have been foundational, or at least informative to your contributions in your work with the Guerrilla Girls. So if I'm correct, you've been part of the Guerrilla Girls Collective since 1985.
Yeah.
And I have several questions about the origins of the Guerrilla Girls, and, some of which, I'll just throw some out and then
Sure.
have at them. So, how did you come up with the name Guerrilla Girls? I've explained to or talked to some students in the past about gorilla masks and guerrilla tactics. Nice plays on play on words there. Thinking about the things that you mentioned with your own life, but you're not the only member of the Guerrilla Girls. So what was going on in the lives of the other members that informed their participation, their interest in starting the collective, and why you and the other members of the collective decided on the work that you needed to do as an anonymous, I would say somewhat anonymous, right? I mean, certainly you're Frida Kahlo, but we don't necessarily know who is behind the mask. So can you speak a bit about the origins of the Guerrilla Girls?
Well, here's our creation story.
Right. As all powerful, influential beings need to have a creation story, right?
Yeah. I graduated from Penn State in art history, and then I went off and worked in the gallery at MIT, and then realized that I really wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to make art. So I was fortunate enough to go to Columbia graduate school. And when I got out of school, I was a little bit older than most of the other students by then. And I looked around, and we were all educated to sort of want to win the art world lottery. and not realizing that there aren't enough winners, really, and that many of us were being trained, to fail. I looked around and with some female artist friends, and we realized that almost all the opportunities in the art world were going to white men. And it just, we were taking it personally. We thought, well, we just don't have, what it takes. And when the Museum of Modern Art opened a show in 1985, it was called an International Survey of Painting and Sculpture. And there were close to 200 artists in the show, and only 17 of them were women, and even fewer than that were artists of color. And they promoted this as an international survey of painting and sculpture. And we looked at ourselves and said, how can this be international? Doesn't make sense. So we went to a very standard protest at the museum. It was organized by the Women's Caucus. And we were chanting, and we had placards, and we had a picket line. And at the end of the day, myself and a good friend, who then became Katja Kollwitz of the Guerrilla Girls, we were just shocked because everyone going into the museum was annoyed with us. There was no effect at all. They really believed that the art world was a pure meritocracy. And we said to ourselves, we have to find a way to break through this preconception, to get people to realize that the art world is as prone to discrimination and to exclusion and also to corruption as every other human activity. So we sort of took a pledge that day, it was an aha moment, that we would find a way to do it. And we started, we had always sat in Finelli's bar in Soho, making fun of the art world, coming up with crazy ideas about ego pills and, secret penis underwear and, crazy things. And we really felt powerful making fun of a system that excluded us. And I think most marginalized groups understand that when your only power is the power to mock, well, you use it. And so we decided to call a meeting, and a small group of women came. And Katja and I came to the meeting with the idea for 2 posters. And one of them was, what do these artists have in common? And it was a list of like 50 prominent white male artists. And they were all over the map in terms of aesthetics, in terms of politics, in terms of age. And we knew that they would not get along if they were in the same room. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to pose this question, what do they have in common? And the answer was they allow their work to be shown in galleries that show no more than 10% women artists or none at all. And then we did the reverse of that. And we did, these galleries don't show art by women. And it was 5 minutes of research, and we looked at it in 2 different ways. And we decided, we took up a collection then, and we decided to put these 2 posters up on the street. But we had to identify ourselves as the creators. So we decided to call ourselves the Guerrilla Girls, guerrilla, as in Spanish, which is a freedom fighter. Because, the art world at that point, and it probably still is such a kind of upper middle class place. And the idea that there might be guerrillas, freedom fighters, lurking somewhere in the art world, it was just tantalizing. We wanted to scare people. And then we decided to call ourselves girls because that was a word that had been used for so long to infantilize grown women. So we thought, let's just take that back. Let's see if we can skew this, this stereotype. So we called ourselves Guerrilla Girls. Well, these posters went up. We didn't realize that all hell would break loose. We started putting up more posters, and very quickly we had a couple of requests for press photos. And we didn't want to lose the opportunity of having a visual presence in the media. So we had to figure out a disguise. So we were sitting at a meeting, and we've never really been theoretical, or we've never had a 5-year plan. We've kind of shot from the hip most of the time. And one of our early members was a really bad speller. Artists have problems with language. Anyway, she was taking notes. Someone always took notes. And she didn't know how to spell gorilla, guerrilla.
Mhm.
And she spelled it gorilla. Just
Mm.
at the time we were discussing, should we wear ski masks? Should we put stockings over our heads? Should we, how can we take this picture? And we looked at her notes and it was like, oh my God, why not? Let's do it. Because gorillas were another stereotype that we wanted to, in a way, flip around. I'm not sure we've done that. And I think that this mask is kind of problematic still.
Mhm.
But at the time, we all had this hope that it was the end of stereotypes and we would just flip it all around by throwing it in people's faces. So that's how the Gorilla Girls were born. At first, it was very protective, the anonymity. We all wanted a piece of, whatever the galleries in the art system were going to give out. And we were afraid that, attacking, biting a hand that you want to feed you was a stupid thing. But we soon realized that what it did is it depersonalized the situation so that our posters couldn't be attacked in terms of our personalities and what we personally had or didn't have in our lives. And that was another aha moment. It's like, this is really working. So we kept doing it. And we would go out in the streets after we put the posters up without our masks. And the truth is, we never used wore our masks when we put up our posters. That would have been too messy.
Mhm.
But we would go up at night, out at night, Friday nights with, wallpaper glue, and we would put these posters up. And then the next day, they were usually around the galleries and so on. And the next day, we'd sort of crawl out of bed and hang around the posters and listen to what people had to say about them. And that would usually give us ideas for the next poster. So one thing led to another, to another, to another.
So I'm struck by a number of elements of what you said, not the least of which is a component that we hear sometimes in studio environments. Someone's working on a drawing or a painting, and there's an intentional impulse, but there might be an accident, or there might be something happenstance that happens, and you kind of go with it, and it actually works in a way that you hadn't intended, but it takes you in a strong direction, and maybe then informs your work. And spelling errors seem to seem to have a similar seem to have a similar outcome. Another element of what you've talked about, which is something that I've used as not necessarily a mantra, but it's a saying I say often enough, and people are starting to suggest that this is part of Steve's approach to things, is to question the answers. You take a given, if you a given or a certain institutional structure as the answer. Well, let's question those answers. And it seems to me that, in interviews with you and other members of the collective, it very much like what you're saying now, you're about questioning the answers, questioning what has been given, and offering other possibilities as you explore them. So I'm wondering a bit about how you relate to that phrase, question the answers.
Well, I would say that answers are usually incomplete, and that history is an argument about the past, an ongoing argument about the past. And situations always change. So what we were confronting in 1985 is very different from what we're confronting now. And if we stayed with the same answers that we had in 1985, um, we would be stuck.
Mhm.
We would be stuck. I mean, we started out questioning why there weren't women artists, why there weren't artists of color in museums. And then we started to question why, when they are tokenized, when they are accepted one by one by one,
Mhm.
why don't they get the same rewards? And why is it only one? And why is this sense of the art world being an Olympics where one or two people win and everyone else loses, when we know that culture is so much richer than that, and that the history of art is written not by a handful of geniuses, but by all of the artists and people who contribute to the environment and the community that makes art. And then the question is, why are museums so stuck? And that's what we're looking at now. And maybe because of our opportunities in Europe, where the museum systems are very different, and museums there are public funding. They don't depend on the art market the way American museums do. American museums right now are corrupt. You know, they're run by billionaires who give money to the museums and get inside information about what artists to invest in. They whitewash their reputations for making rubber bullets and tear gas and opioids and financing prisons, you know, for-profit prisons and securitizing student loans. But they're thought of as being these cultural heroes because they give millions of dollars to museums. So we want to question, where does the money come from that funds museums? And what does that do to what a museum chooses? And why are there so many museums in the United States that have the same small handful of artists? You know, what influence does the art market, which is really an expression of hypercapitalism, what does that have to do with writing art history? You know, whose history is it? Is it the history of the wealthy and the powerful, or is it truly a history of culture? What museums are unique, and what museums sort of flow with this idea of the mainstream? So I don't know, that's a circuitous way of answering your question, but that brings you up to what we're thinking about now. And I think we built each one of those answers on the previous questions.
No, absolutely. No, it sounds like questioning the answers to me, and the questions drive the next set of questions, because, you know, this is one mode of, if not a primary mode of learning, of knowledge construction, is to inquire, is to ask questions, so that new information is presented or uncovered or revealed, that then allows us to dig a bit deeper. Another piece that you were that I'm connecting to here is the phrase and the movement, museums are not neutral. And this is also, to me, what you're talking about, that you know, conceiving of a museum as a space, as a cultural institution that is absent or void of political, social, cultural influence, that we put only the very best aesthetic objects in the space, and they're free from certain kinds of influences, is just not the case. And that's part of what the questions that you are asking through your work, is to question that sense of neutrality and that sense of objectivity that museums don't have, and perhaps and never had.
Yeah, well, when we first started, people in the art world really bought into the idea of the art world as a meritocracy. And these were people who were making decisions. They had no idea of how their privilege and their positions informed their decisions. And at one point, a very prominent gallery owner said, well, you know, women and artists of color just aren't making the work that addresses the major dialogue, you know, in the art world now. And it was shocking. You know, at that point in 1985, if someone in the world of sports or entertainment had said something like that, they would have lost their job. Mm-hmm. But this went on in the art world for a long time because the market supported it. You know, if the market has a few geniuses, well, the prices can go up and everyone can play poker. And also, we wanted to create a different economic model where we do these posters. We always had an argument early on about whether they were politics or art, and we could never decide as a group. We could never agree. So we decided it doesn't matter. You know, we're just they just are what they are. We don't exist in the art market the way other people do. We really gain our power from hundreds of people spending $20 or $30 on a poster of ours. And that's kind of anathema to big time artists who really want their work to become more and more and more valuable. We're just happy to keep making these posters and to writing books. We love to write books. We've written 5 books now.
Just the whole idea of raising consciousness, raising questions, working against the grain. We can do this in serious ways, right? In very studied arguments, or like the poster behind you, which I think is great to have that as the backdrop, right? I mean, there's, I love it. You see my book Confessions back here on the bookshelf. I had to put that here to talk with you.
It's so nice to see that. It's totally out of print. Don't sell it. Don't sell it.
No, it is a precious component of my library. The seriousness, as scholars, you get trained to or prepared to be, to deal with ideas in certain ways. But come on, humor, sarcasm. Talk to me about how you wield that approach. I mean, the poster behind you, obviously, there has to be humor, sarcasm, and seriousness all folded together. What is that formula like? How does that come together for you?
Well, I think, the humor of resistance is so interesting to me. And we're living in a great age of that. All you have to do is look at stand-up comedy right now.
Right.
Sadly, there aren't enough women, but all the same, when you compare that to the comedy on TV in the 50s, it's like, hey. I think, comedy has to have a little bit of anger in it, and it has to reveal something. And we discovered that the best way to get people's attention was to say something funny, or maybe something contradictory. And if you look at over our work, and this doesn't apply to every poster that we've done, but we usually start with making a headline. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? And all of a sudden you think, are women taking their clothes off to be admitted to the museum? And what it really is about is the fact that not many women artists are in the modern art, sections of the museum, but most of the art, most of the figures, naked figures in the paintings are women. So it really poses an interesting question about subject versus object in art, and it gets into the idea of the male gaze. And what we're discovering now is it's also about sexual violence. We're doing a new project called The Male Graze, not male gaze, The Male Graze.
Graze with an R, graze.
Yeah. Because we're beginning to realize that when you start to look at Western art and the way women are portrayed and depicted as idle, naked, idle, lying around, for the delectation, of heterosexual men. There's a lot of violence in that too. There are naked women being seduced, being harassed, being raped, being abducted, and even being murdered. There are scenes of femicide in Western art. And it's almost part of a theme on Western art. And so we're starting to look at the behavior of male artists like Gauguin. He would probably be in jail now. He married a succession of young women, wanting to be primitive, wanting to get away from his Eurocentrism. And he probably gave them all syphilis. And that was not, that was really bad behavior, but somehow it's accepted as part of what an artist is in the West. And we're not trying to moralize and devalue his work. It's very interesting. But I think we have to realize what gender and what sexual assault and harassment and violence have to do in art, and how they're expressed in Western art, and certainly in Western literature too. Overwhelming themes. So why should we be so surprised?
Certainly, if we if we don't talk about certain issues, if we don't reveal or expose certain realities, they persist and
Yeah.
they become normalized. I would say the work that you and the Guerrilla Girls do helps us to not normalize certain if not certain behaviors, certain thoughts and certain thinking around behaviors that then allows us to position ourselves differently with them.
We've done that with a lot of topics. And one thing that we're dealing with right now is how do museums deal with sexual assault? And how do they write museum labels when the artist is a sexual predator? Um, I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, but we could actually show this poster that we did about Chuck Close and how museums are struggling with how to identify his history with his predatory history with women. Um, we also, when we did a book, the Guerrilla Bitches, Bimbos, and Ball Breakers, the Guerrilla Girls Illustrated Guide to Female Stereotypes, which was a lot of fun. It was so much fun, although stereotypes do go in and out of style, so we really need to readdress that. But everyone, it was an attempt to tell a serious history of stereotypes, but in a kind of ironic way. Instead of talking about what women were left, what women lacked, or how unfair art history was to women artists, we wanted to select a group of women artists and just tell their stories to prove the fact that there have always been great women artists in history. It's a question of art history recognizing them, and also women artists of color.
Absolutely. Resisting that deficit perspective or deficit model, and just presenting them on their own right. No, um, I think somehow we got here with me raising a question about sarcasm and humor, and we keep getting to these very serious pieces, but that's what the work is about, right? That's what the Guerrilla Girls work is about. It's about finding entry points into serious social and cultural issues through humor, through sarcasm, through provocative, headline statements like we see in the poster there. Thinking about, look, it's mid-November 2020, right? We're just a couple of weeks after. Actually, this is on a Tuesday, so it's 2 weeks after the U.S. presidential election, right? The world is engaging in all sorts of conversations with protests, and you talked earlier about sexual violence that is ongoing, police brutality, racial injustice, economic uncertainty. I mean, the list goes on and on about there are various forms of violence that are enacted in the world. How do those forms of violence fit into the work that the Guerrilla Girls seeks to provoke, would you say?
Well, we've always been involved in many of those issues, and if any of the viewers want to go to our website, they'll see a Black Lives Matter video that we did this summer. It was a compilation of video that our members took at various protests. We did something in 2016. Let's see if I can show it to you. We did we did this the day after Donald Trump won the election, and it was how we feared that he would. President Trump announces new commemorative months and how he would change all of these months. And for example, Women's History Month became Supermodel Month. Black History Month became Ku Klux Klan Month. On and on. So we did that not knowing what would happen. We thought, this will never happen. Maybe if we do this poster, people will respond. Well, the scary thing is 4 years later, a lot of it did happen. So the poster, which started out being kind of funny, just absurd, is now kind of tragic. And let's hope that some of these things can be taken back.
I hear you. In some ways, those works were prescient and predictive. Maybe if you produce other kinds of posters, the future might follow.